Distant pond balls, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk. Must be 6:30. Must be Wednesday. Join us tonight. Got a number of topics to talk about and answer your questions. I'm hanging out in Vicksburg, Mississippi, on our way back from Montgomery and Birmingham, Alabama. Got to hang out with Mark and Margaret Dauber. They hosted us a couple of nights ago, and we got to spend some time with them. Then we all went to Ray Scott's memorial service together yesterday, and it was very moving. Had a lump in my throat 2 or 3 times. Got to listen to people love on Ray. And for those of you guys that don't know who Ray Scott was, he was the guy that started BASS and Bassmasters Classics, Bassmaster Fishing Tournaments, and was known as the Bass Boss. So got to spend a little time with his family, got to hug on his wife, Susan, and got to visit with Bill Dance and Johnny Morris and see Roland Martin, Jimmy Hughes. Some of those guys have been around forever, and to listen to several of them speak was really, really fun. Hello, Tim Stewart, checking in from South Florida. Glad you're safe from that big blow they had down there. Todd Stegner, good to see you. Doug Cusick, good to see you. So let's see here. I'm going to figure out how to do these so I can go through all these different comments that you guys are making here. Figure out how to play that game. Look at there, Mike Cottrell. You know what to do, Mike. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like. Share this video to your timeline. You're eligible for a Pond Boss hat, which I don't have one with me because I'm holed up in a hotel room and I didn't bring it. And whatever else that Leanne deems fun for a drawing. So, hey, and you guys know the drill. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date. And it lasts a year, and there's nuggets in every one of them. I thought I'd talk about a number of things tonight. Talk about that tribute to Ray, his memorial service, and I'm very fortunate that I got to spend quite a bit of time with Ray Scott, and very blessed, and he was I consider him a dear friend, along with several thousand other people I expect, but I got to go do some fun things with Ray in the past, and I've told you guys some of those stories, and there's just so much about that guy. He was, affectionately, I told him this before, he was one of the few guys that I could actually sit down and listen to talk about himself and want more. Most people, when they start talking about themselves, you kind of get worn out with that, but Ray had such a way with the stories, the color that he put into it. The words that he spoke, you could see those words. And, oh my gosh, it was just so much fun to hang out with him and over the years. And as we go, I'll tell some more stories about him. I know some of you are interested in what happened last week when I was up in Wyoming. That was really fun. I got to tour a fraction of a 70,000-acre ranch that's got live water on it. There's some springs, a couple of which flow like 6,000 or 7,000 gallons a minute, even at just average rates. The problem with the springs and the streams there is that ranch for a long time was grazed by cattle, and it wasn't grazed well. So there's been some erosion, and they're looking at ways that they can figure out how to renovate those streams, to bring them back, revive them to what they were before the erosion started happening. And they're working with an engineer, and I read through his reports, fascinating report, and I'm excited to be able to help them. They've got, I think, 6 ponds that they want to figure out how to make better. So I got to spend some time doing that. That was really, really fun. Let's see what we got here. Kenny Sanderson. Holy cow, Scott Schilling just left loaded with fish. That's good, Kenny, that you can raise some fish and send them to a good home before winter gets here. Dude, I get it. Hello, William Hickson. Live on a canal system off a big lake. What can I do to clean up the muck and pine needles and excess lily pads? Well, the reason that you've got lily pads there is because there's enough nutrition in that muck to be able to feed them. And if you want to get rid of them, you need to talk to some of the local authorities there to find out what you can do and what you can't do. But to clean up the muck, you can aerate the canals. You can aerate the water around the edge of the lake. I don't know how big the lake is, but in your canal system, if you can aerate that water and force it to move, then you can begin to break down the part of the muck that is actually organic matter. Now, I've seen ponds where the organic matter made up 80% of the muck, but I've also seen where organic matter made up 5% of the muck, and the rest was just loose, microscopic chunks of dirt, clay, that sort of thing. Drew Full Circle. That's a good name. I like that. First-time watcher, long-time magazine follower. Good to see you, Drew. Welcome. Hello, Danny Mack, Frank James. I'll be running through your part of the country early in the morning. We're hanging out in Vicksburg, home of one of the last battles of the War of Northern Aggression, where the Union Army holed up a bunch of Confederates and finally made them surrender, which was a turning point in the war. I think I read somewhere where there is the USS, I can't think of the name of the ship that was sunk in the Yazoo River, the U.S. Cairo, I think it was, where and the city fathers were able to rouse that thing up from its resting place and bring it back and display it around here somewhere. So there's a lot of history, especially Civil War history, rooted right here in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And that's where we're hanging out. So let's see here. Frank, gotcha. Frank James will be coming through. Got to get Debbie to Dallas by noon tomorrow. So we'll be rolling through Shreveport, Houghton, Longview pretty early in the morning. So, all right, stop and wave. Hello, John Funk. 51 degrees, and you got a hard freeze warning. That's what happens when you live in Michigan. You go from spring, 3 days of summer, and then winter, right? No fall. Good job, Michael Ehrig, all the way up from Iowa, checking in. Linda Madsen, John Madsen, he's over in Illinois. Let's see here. See the comments coming. Let me scroll down there and see what's going on. Holy cow, John Funk got it right. Yep. Let's see. Mike McPherson, good evening from Indiana. Anxiously waiting on the water temperature to cool so we can get your tilapia. I love that idea. Get those tilapia for the freezer. That's good. Bring it on. Billy Bates, Wyoming. I bet you saw some nice elk. Yeah, you know what? If you go to my Facebook page later on, the Bob Lusk Facebook page, you'll see some pictures. As we were driving around in a side-by-side, looking at the streams and the springs and things like that, we came across a meadow at probably 4,500 feet, maybe 4,000 feet, I would expect, and we saw some dust. And the guy driving the side-by-side said, "Hey, just wait till you see this." We pull up there and shoot, there was 150 elk in a herd. There were probably 10 bulls, and we just got to stop and watch them and watched how the herd bull moved the herd where he wanted them to go. He moved them up, sent them around up the hill and over the crest of a ridge, and then they disappeared. But that herd bull stayed back to make sure that everybody was gone. And, there were probably 10 bulls, and the rest were cows and calves, and that was pretty darn fun. I came back to that place the next day and just parked in my truck and sat. And there were still a few elk that had just left that meadow on the next day, and as I sat, I saw 5 white-tailed deer, I saw 3 mule deer, and I saw just a little bitty flock of turkeys, which is pretty cool. Hello, Michael Gray, Nashville, Tennessee. Drew Schmidt, pond is experiencing his first turnover. Green film covering the surface and a slight smell. Hoping to get a windmill next year to help with this. Can you switch off a windmill aerator during the winter? Yes, you can. You sure can, Drew. Talk to Outdoor Water Solutions. Now, one of the sponsors, they advertise in Pond Boss as well. They do windmills. So, get in touch with John Red over there. He's happy to help you and talk to you about it. Hello there, R.E. Thompson. Holy cow, my thing here is going faster than I can read it. It seems mighty late for my pond to turn green. Visibility about 24 inches. Is it doing any good to the food chain? Yes, it is. So here's the skinny on that deal. When we looked at the Daubers Pond yesterday, and I guess it was, yesterday. Yeah, we left yesterday. But looking at it, they had a really dense planktonic algae bloom, and the planktonic algae was beginning to die. And you could see it coming to the surface, and it was in a couple of layers. The top 6 inches had a less dense layer. Than from 6 inches down to about 18 inches, it was more dense. But I'm pretty sure their pond was turning over as well. And I've gotten several calls in the last few days from folks. John Barrett out west of Fort Worth called and sent pictures, and the way he described it, there was not much doubt in my mind that his pond was turning over. And that happens about this time of year. Let me tell you what that is. So in the spring of the year, when the days start to get longer and the earth changes on its axis, the temperature starts to go up, heat starts to hit the water and warm up the water. But as water warms, it gets less dense, it spreads out, and it gets lighter. So the heat will only go down so far. And as it goes down, it forms a layer, like a layer cake. So you have a warm layer of water that ends up sitting on top of a cold layer of water. Now that cold layer of water is divided from the warm layer of water by what we call the thermocline. Thermocline. Thermocline, C-L-I-N-E. So what happens is as this warmer layer of water gets even warmer, it differentiates itself from that lower layer. Now, oxygen, temperature, sunlight fuel the metabolism of a pond. It fuels the biology of a pond. And so what's going on below the thermocline during the summertime is all the oxygen gets consumed, mostly by microbial activity, much more so than fish. So the organic matter that ends up going down below the thermocline or sitting on the pond bottom consumes oxygen, and then that lower layer of water runs out of oxygen and becomes anoxic. So when that happens, everything becomes anaerobic and it slows way, way, way down. So we get through the summer, it's hot. Then we get to this time of year where we get a cold front, then we get a few warm days, and we get another passage of fronts that start to cool the water down. Days are getting shorter, less daylight, less sunlight, less heat. That warm layer of water cools down, and as it gets to the same temperature as that lower layer of water, their densities are the same, then they intermingle, they mix. That's called a turnover. Now, if that warm layer of water gets too cool too fast, they can flip. And when that happens, then you've got problems with fish dying, and which that doesn't happen very often. And here's one of the reasons why. The top 3 feet of most ponds is the same volume of water as the rest of the entire pond. So if you do the math on that, ponds are sloped, they go down. That top 3 feet is as much or more volume of water than the rest of the pond. Well, when ponds stratify, they stratify halfway down. You got water 15 feet deep, you're going to stratify it about 7 or 8 feet deep. So what that means is there's a higher volume of healthy water sitting on top of that volume of anoxic water. That's why turnovers don't kill fish. But what they do is they'll sure generate a last-minute plankton bloom, algae bloom, even a blue-green algae bloom, which I'm on the lookout for that. Most of the time we see blue-green algae is in the hot part of the summer. But what I'm seeing right now is a lot of planktonic algae blooms, and I've seen several really good healthy blooms. So here's the answer to the question. Yes, it does help the food chain. It also helps to shade out the plants that are beginning to go dormant and help slow them down so that they can get ready to fall to the bottom, go dormant. Whether they die or not depends on the kind of plant and where you are. So then the way all this kind of ties together is when that water temperature gets back down within the range of spawning, this is across the nation, you very likely will see another bluegill spawn before the winter sets in. So that's one of the magic things about nature is when you've got a good bloom this time of year and the water temperature gets down in that really perfect range for bluegills to spawn, and they do, survival rates of baby bluegill in the fall will go up. Your food chain should be about as peaked out as it can get. And that's one of nature's things as well. If you've done everything right, you've balanced your fishery, you've harvested small bass if you needed to, and your game fish are not overeating your food chain, game fish. If your game fish are here and your food chain's here, you're going to go into the winter with some really, really good food. and then would get another spawn of bluegill before you go into the fall, then you can have be set up pretty good to have a good buffet line for your game fish going in. Now, like I said last week, if you're confident you don't have enough food chain going into the late fall, then you need to do something about it, and that might mean buying a few fish. So let me see here. Let me see what all we got going on. Yep. So, Brother Thompson, there was 6 minutes worth of yes. Troy Todd, good to see you, buddy. Pancho Puentes. Half-acre pond about 6 feet deep. Deepest part of the pond, how many bass, catfish, bluegill, crappie can it hold? Well, I wouldn't do a half-acre pond with catfish. If you want to, and catfish, I tell people to stock the number that they're going to harvest. I think a good safe number for a half-acre pond, 6 feet deep, don't go over 100 catfish. Bluegill, 300 or 400. Don't stock crappie. Bass, build a food chain if you don't have fish in there now. How many can it hold? Let me do it this way. A half-acre pond about 6 feet deep, and I'm making some assumptions. I'm making some assumptions that you've got access to fresh water, whether it's via rain or OL. If you don't, and you have evaporation, then we're going to change the equation. But how many? Let's do this. We'll do it this way. How many pounds of fish can a half-acre pond hold? A half-acre pond can hold, I'm going to tell you, safely 200 to 250 pounds of fish, especially if you've got catfish in there. If you don't have catfish, it's probably not going to hold that many pounds. Now, the numbers of fish are going to be based on how big they are and what kind of food chain you've got to support them. Let's see here. Drew's putting in a pond for a client. Do I prefer anchor trench or anchor shelf for holding down the liner? Anchor trench. I prefer an anchor trench. I prefer that to be up out of the, above the water line a couple of feet so it's never breached. You dig the trench, you put the liner in, and then you compact clay back down inside that trench. And if you have any questions about that, call Mike Otto. Otto's Dozer Service, Lindsay, Texas. He's installed a number of those. So if you haven't done that yet, man, I would do that. Hello, Harrison Davis. Good to see you, buddy. Frank, Bob, I noticed that I've stocked threadfin shad and golden shiners in the past, but I noticed the golden shiners don't last long. Threadfins do unless they're killed by cold winter. Yet I see largemouth bass and hybrid stripers attacking the threadfins near the surface all the time. Why do threadfin shad seem to survive predation better than golden shiners? We're going to assume that statement's true because I've seen the opposite. The reason threadfin shad can survive predation better is because they can reproduce over and over and over. Golden shiners are going to spawn one time in the spring, maybe twice, depending on the conditions, where threadfin shad or their average lifespan is not but maybe 18 months in the wild. And that's not necessarily related to longevity as it is as much as to being eaten so fast. So what happens with those, if you've got a good plankton bloom, which is a good food source, threadfin shad are filter feeders. Keep that in mind. Golden shiners are predator fish, limited by their small mouth. If you tie on a tiny little hook and you put a little hunk of night crawler on that hook, you're going to catch a golden shiner, but you're not going to catch a threadfin shad. Threadfin shad has a mouth at the end of their face pointed up, and they're filter feeders. Now, I've seen threadfin shad babies grazing on and feeding on the fines of fish food. I've seen them come around a dock and peck the algae off the standards that hold the dock up, the pilings. I've seen them do that. But they just live two different lifestyles. And one other thing that the threadfin shad do is they have a tendency to stay out in open water. So when they're in open water, a bass has to leave its confines in places that it senses that it's safe and goes out and has to actively hunt, which they will. But threadfin shad stand a better chance of survival because of those three things. If they've got a great food chain, they're filter feeders. They live in a different niche out in open water, and they reproduce much, much more often than golden shiners do. So there you go. That's a pretty good answer. I liked it. Okay, let's see. Harrison Davis got it. Hashtag Palm Moss Magazine. Click like. Share this to your timeline. You're eligible for a drawing for a Palm Moss hat. and whatever else that we've got in the office that Leanne's got. Now, she was going to do a drawing today, but she got called out of the office and wasn't able to do it, so we'll do that next week. So there's, let's see, Drew says, pond aerator on all the time, during the day only or night only. Here's what I'm going to tell you. And this is going to be conducive to October, and you need to run that aeration system full-time, 24/7 in October until your water temperature hits 55 degrees. Then you can either turn it off, or if you have a compelling reason to have it on, like if you live in the north and you want to keep a hole open at the edge of your pond, you can move your diffuser over into water maybe 5 feet deep, close to the shallow end, and you can keep a hole open. Just don't do that out in the deeper part of the pond if you live in areas where you're going to ice over. Don't do that. So now, if this was July, I'd be telling you something different. If this were July and your pond temperatures are in the 80s, I'd tell you to run that aeration system from night at night till about 9 in the morning, because it's more important to keep the temperature below 85. Actually, I'd rather it be below 83. 83 is the magic number for warm water fishing ponds. If you can keep the water temperature below 83, you're hitting a home run, and you're going to be more likely to have a successful time. David Schneiderman, Easy Docks of Texas, y'all. If you need a floating dock, here's your guy right here. When do we shut down feeders? Boy, I hate giving a smart aleck answer, but here it comes. When the fish stop eating. So what'll happen, David, typically most species of fish get really sluggish as the temperature of the water gets down into the mid-50s. Just pick 55 as a number. Now, bluegill will continue to feed sluggishly until the water temperature is about 46, and then they'll shut back down. But with your pond, I would watch and see when the temperature gets down in the mid-50s, and then let it run out of feed. Now, another thing you can do, what I tell people, what we did at Kingfisher back when we were managing that lake actively, we would let the feeders run out of feed except where we knew the bluegills lived, and then we would just cut those feeders back to maybe 5 seconds once a day or 4 seconds once a day, where we could feed a pound to feed out of 10 feeders in a 125-acre lake. Because I was totally convinced, and still am to this day, that if you want to grow bluegill over 2 pounds, you need to feed them a little bit over the wintertime. So you're seeing signs of a recent bluegill spawn. Keep feeding. Yes, keep feeding. Now, if you got a really, really good plankton bloom means the water is an olive color and visibility is 24 inches, 18 inches, something like that, then you've got the food chain built that those baby bluegills are going to want. Hello, Fred Bingaman. Love you, brother. Jim Allen from, hi from a Kentuckian in New Mexico. That's sweet. Good to see you, buddy. Let's see here. Doug Cusick, I pulled up a minnow trap. Did you just say hi to Fred? Hey, Fred, Debbie's over here, and she just said to say hello to you. And Connie, yes, especially Aunt Connie. And you know what? I got a feeling my grandkids are watching this, and I got scolded a little bit. So Madeline and Nicholas, hello to you guys. They're driving down to Florida. Their dad, my son Cameron, and his bride Jessica, they're a part of the United Cajun Navy. They're based in Alabama, so they're headed down to Florida to serve some people down there that need some help down there in southern Florida. Hats off to them. Okay, R.E. Thompson, understand now why it's blooming. There you go. It's blooming partly because it's turning over. The temperature's perfect. The nutrients are perfect. And you got the right sunlight. There's the Gruz family's checking in. They got it. Let's see. Thompson says, tell me how many of the medium, and how long should my feeders go off during the winter? 5 acres, 3 feeders. Okay. Tell me how many. Okay, I'm not quite understanding that, so I'm going to give it a go. How long? You know what? During the winter, if you got 5 acres, 3 feeders, have 1 feeder going off for 2 seconds a day in the winter. Frank James, thank you, bet. Michael Eric, do smallmouth thrive on small bluegill? Yes, they do. Now so rather than just give you a total yes answer, here's what I'm going to tell you. Is smallmouth bass will eat small bluegill. The problem is, holy cow, it's running past me here. The problem is that bluegill can reproduce faster and grow larger quicker that smallmouth bass can do to control them. So the problem with smallmouth bass and bluegill is bluegill, and Michael lives in Iowa, so you're right there on the cusp before bluegill maybe only spawn twice, 3 times a year. When the fewer times they spawn, the bigger they get faster. So smallmouth bass have a really hard time trying to control their numbers. So at some point, it's inevitable, if you've only got smallmouth bass with bluegill, the bluegill are going to get to a point that they've overpopulated, and you're going to have to harvest some with a trap or a seine or a whole lot of fishing with a cane pole. Okay, so Doug Brown, so a 6-foot deep pond is deep enough to support threadfin shad. Yes, it is. The thing about a 6-foot pond, threadfin shad really needs some open water. You know, the depth is really, the only relevance to depth is volume of storage capacity. So in areas where, you know, it's arid or you don't get as much rain or evaporation rates are high, that's why you need more depth. You know, if you go to a fish hatchery and look and see where they raise threadfin shad or raise bluegills or whatever, those ponds are never much deeper than 6 feet deep. You know, so, and the productivity goes on in the upper part, you know. And so a 6-foot deep pond's still probably going to stratify, you know, so you got to keep that in mind. Okay, let me see here. Oh, Pancho, what do we do about blue herons? And I see down here, Billy Bates asked Bob about lurch. Honey, I'm going to tell the lurch story. I was up in upstate New York years and years and years ago, and this was probably 2003 or 2004 probably, and we had just built a new pond right beside our home that Debbie and I had bought and remodeled. We'd probably been living there, I don't know, maybe a year or so, and I was up between Syracuse and Rochester working on a project up there. Debbie calls me, and she's got a little urgency in her voice. She says, "Honey, where's your shotgun?" Well, my daddy had given me a 410 when I was 13 or 14 years old, and she was asking me where it was. I said, "Why do you want my shotgun?" She said, "Well, there's this big, tall, gray bird out there right by the feeder, and it just poked a big bluegill and ate it. I want to shoot it." I said, "Well, honey, wait a minute. You know, that's a great blue heron, and that's what they do. That's how they make a living. He's just trying to make a living like we all are." And so the conversation went to something else, and we hung up, and I came home a few days later, and out there watching Debbie have coffee. I hadn't started drinking coffee yet, still haven't. And we're out there sitting on the porch we got kind of a rock patio out there at LL, 2, and the feeder went off, and boy, here comes this big, tall, great blue heron, lands and spears about a pound and a quarter bluegill, drags it out on the ground, starts pecking on it. Well, I knew he couldn't swallow it, you know, so I stood up. She says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to go in there and get the shotgun." She says, "You're not going to shoot lurch, are you?" Well, she named the darn bird. So what I did was I went over there and I changed the timer on the feeder and changed it to after dark, and that way lurch had to work a little harder to get his food. All right, Billy Bates, besides trying to fatten all our fish up in the fall going into winter, what are some other good things to be doing in the fall of the year to make our pond succeed? That's a great question. I'm glad you did that. One of the things you need to do is make sure your water's happy. Now, keep in mind that and I preach this over and over and over. Happy water, that's number one. If you don't have happy water, nothing else matters. The second thing is that you got the right kind of habitat. If you haven't had problems with river otters yet, you probably will. If you don't have some escape cover for your game fish, you know, like just think about the canopy of a tree with a lot of the small limbs cut off, built to where it's put at a 45-degree angle down in deeper water where your bass can hide, then the odds of a river otter catching some are pretty high. So be on the lookout for predators. The fall time of the year is when we start seeing cormorants and other predatory birds migrating south. They can decimate a pond. So can river otters. Watch for signs of river otters. But number one, make sure your water's happy. If you've aerated through the course of the year, that's good. If you're in areas where you're at risk of a winter kill under the ice, and you got a lot of plants, go buy an aquatic plant rake and rake those plants out on the shore. Get them out. If you get that mass out, you're going to reduce the odds of a winter kill. The second thing is improve your habitat. Make sure that your habitat's in good shape. Just one of the key points I made right there is help make it predator proof. But also if you don't have some dense cover for your baby bluegill that are hatching right now, then their survival rates will probably not be high enough long enough. Okay, then the food chain is the next piece. Be sure you got the food chain. We beat that up last week. Then fall's a pretty good time to change genetics if you need to do that. If you want to improve the genetics, fall's a good time to do that. Another thing, a couple of things to do in the fall is work your equipment over. Make sure your aeration system is in good shape going into the winter, so when you shut it down, you can rehab the compressors. If you need to clean out, if you need to clean off the diffusers, whatever, fall's a good time to do that. So do your maintenance, put your boats up, whatever you need to do with that. So those are the main things for that right now. Let me see here. It's 7 o'clock. Let's do the commercial. Hey, Palm Boss Magazine, $35 a year. Cheaper than a Friday night date, lasts a year. Here it is, full of nuggets, I promise you. If you don't get something out of each issue, I tell you I'd give your money back, but I'm not. Once you buy it, you're in. You're part of the family. Although you don't have to spend $35 to be a part of this family, I promise. But it just would be nice. Purina Mills, I love those guys. I've had a relationship with them since 1995, and they sincerely want to work doing their R&D to be sure that we've got some outstanding products in terms of fish food, to feed our different fish. So they've got diets for bluegills. They've got diets for hybrid stripers, tilapia, catfish. So they've run the gamut. They've got a good lineup of feeds. Texas Hunter Feeders. I love Texas Hunter Feeders. Not only the product's great, but their customer service is great. You can call Cody or Chris down there if you need to troubleshoot a problem. Some of these guys on here watching this show can type up a little testimony about Texas Hunter Feeders. Matter of fact, do that. If you've ever had an issue, whether it's shipping or whether it's water leaked in there or somebody had a mouse, and one of my feeders had a mouse in it, where I let it run out of feed, and then the battery went down, and it quit running, had a dadgum mouse climb up in there and build a nest. And I saw that where another guy had that. But give us a little testimony about that. And David Schneiderman, I've already talked a little bit about his floating docks, Easy Docks of Texas. Todd Stegner has a 3-ish acre pond that they haven't managed. Never has one. Bass are skinny, about 14 to 16 inches. What few bluegill I can catch are massive adults, super thick. I don't see many small ones. Water's clear as bottled water. Don't see much of any habitat. Where do we start to fix this? Going to work on habitat this winter when ice. Okay, here's what you need to do with that. You need to start culling bass. Weigh and measure. Several guys wanted the length, weight, relative weight chart. And I emailed 2 or 3 of those this last week. So you weigh and measure some bass. Start culling bass. Now, when you tell me that the bass are skinny and the bluegill are big, that makes perfectly good sense because bluegill get larger in lakes where bass are overcrowded. So start to cull some bass. And don't be afraid to cull some now, especially if you can weigh and measure. Like, for example, a 10-inch bass should weigh about 10 ounces. 12-inch bass, 12 ounces. 14-inch bass, 1 pound, 7 ounces. A 16-inch bass should weigh 2 1/4. An 18-inch bass is 3 1/4. If you catch a bass that doesn't meet those standard weights, out it comes, because it ought to be in pretty good shape going into the fall. If it doesn't have body fat and good flesh built up, its odds of survival through the winter are pretty low anyway. So one of the things you can do right now is start culling some bass in that 3 acre pond. How many? If you could cull 40 bass this fall, if you could even catch in a 3 acre pond 60, and depending on the size, if you can catch 40 to 60 pounds of bass that are skinny and cull them this fall, then you're going to be in good shape. Do the habitat improvement. Do that as well. Spend some time at palmboss.com and ask the boss and look at some of the free articles and take a look at that. Another commercial I need to do right now. I've still got 4 slots for the Institute of Higher Pondology coming up at the end of this month. I've got a fantastic lineup, some great courses, hands-on, electrofishing boat, water sampling, water chemistry. 4 slots, they're $1,500 a piece, which that covers room and board and food and the course content. It's going to be held at a ranch down near Brenham, Texas, Chapel Hill. And you guys email me if somebody wants to come, because I've got room for 4 more people, and I'd like to fill those slots. That'll help make it worthwhile, and you'll still get plenty of good one-on-one attention. Harrison Davis, at what relative weight would you say a largemouth bass will not grow if they don't have enough to eat to raise the WR? Let me see what that means. Fred and Connie said hello to you too, honey. Queen Debbie. Jessica, hey baby, said hello to the kids a while ago. Said hello, got to see the grandkids. Hung out in Birmingham today. We were at Vulcan Park. Climbed all the way up that damn tower. Elevator was broken, so we climbed how many stairs? 250? 300 steps. Yeah, well, we did that. Yep, my legs felt like jello, but by golly, we got there. So let's see, Harrison Davis, at what relative weight, what WR percentage would you say a largemouth will not grow if they don't have enough to eat to raise? At what WR would you say a large? I'm not sure what that question means, Harrison, but here's what I think it means. If a largemouth bass is 85% or lower, the odds are high that they can't make that up, even with a whole lot of food. You know, so if they're 85% or lower in the fall going into the winter, I'd say that their odds of getting back to 100 is pretty low, and I'm real confident to tell you that if they're at like 75 or 80%, it took them months to get that way, they can't make up that lost time. Now what that means is that their top-end growth potential's pretty well shot. So culling them under 90 is pretty smart. You know, some of the 90s may have been thin for a shorter period of time. They can maybe make that up. But there's going to have to be a big turnaround in the food chain quickly, or a bunch of fish culled. Because here's what's going on. You got this many bass, this much bait fish. When you reduce this number, it still takes time for this to go back up. So even though it might have taken 6 or 8 months to get like this, even if you cull them now, it's going to take another 6 or 8 months to get this. So you've lost a year with those fish that are underweight. Jacob West, hello, buddy. All right, there's the Groons is checking in. Drought has our 4-acre pond down at least 3 feet, estimated 3 surface acres of water left. Of that, estimating 1 acre has a maximum depth of 5 feet. This pond has a nice bluegill population, concerned about the winter and how everything will do with limited depth, assuming not much rain coming anytime soon. With some effort, I can pump water in from a bigger pond. Should I push to pump water over, or do you think everything should survive the winter with the 5 foot of depth max now? I think that 5 feet of depth, as long as the water's happy, is enough. Now, if the thing that 5 feet does is it makes you a little bit more open to predators. You know, but in terms of how well will the fish survive and thrive, they'll do fine. They will do fine. I'm not too worried about them making it through the winter. Now, I'll tell you this, it would be smart to pump more water in there if the other pond can afford it and your back pocket can afford it. Hello, Jason Rothamel. Good to see you, buddy. So let's see here. Let's see what this is. So a 6 foot deep pond is deep enough to support. Okay. The advantage of deeper water is that it gives the shad thermal refuge during cold snaps. That's true. But otherwise not needed. That's true as well. Mike Cook from North Cadillac, overseeing around the pond and putting seed, fertilizer, and lime out. Our pond is filled by runoff. Any concerns? No. When you're putting out seed, fertilizer, and lime, I'm presuming that you're overseeding some turf with in North Carolina that's probably going to be winter rye, maybe some wheat, I don't know, but it's a good idea to overseed, especially where there's disturbed soils or there's any risk of erosion. The lime if the water runs over the lime, it's just going to help dissolve it and put it in the water, which that's not a bad thing. Now, depending on how the water flows, then the seeds can be washed into the pond or clumped into those eroded areas. That's really the biggest deal. I love me some Nick and Madeline. Tell them Papa says howdy. Love them. You guys be safe on your trip. Hello, Bob Lusk, my cousin from Mineral Wells, Texas. Good to see you, buddy. That got a charge out of Debbie too. Good to see you, Bub. Love to spend some time with you here before long, pal. We're almost ready for company. When we are, we'll holler at you. Larry Hottesty, boss man, you are the bomb. Well, I'm about to go off on something, I'm sure. Troy Todd, we have already taken out 116 pounds of largemouth from my 3-acre pond this year. Still plan on taking out a few more before winter. That's a lot. Because you got to also know that a 3-acre pond's carrying capacity is going to be somewhere between 50 and 75 pounds of bass per acre. So be picky about how much you harvest. And the way I tell people is harvest is ongoing, but if you overdo it, then what you're going to do is make room for more baby fish to come up and fill the same slot that you just culled from. Now think about that piece right there. If you overharvest, then you're going to leave more space and more food for more young fish to come fill up the slots. And when that happens, then you're overcrowded again. So what you're really after is you're really trying to get to the point where you've got enough fish that are this big, that big, that big, that big. So you want diversity of sizes, and the fish are all chunky. And if you've got that, then you're in a good spot. But if you overharvest all the fish in a certain class, anything say 12 to 16 inches, and you cull all of them or too many of them or as many as you can catch, you have two problems with that. Number one, you're culling some of your most aggressive fish. And number two, you're emptying the slot, which means that those young fish are going to fill it. And that means you're going to get higher survival rates of young fish, which means you're still going to be overcrowded. Relative weights under, okay, so that's important to know. RW's under 90%. So you're on a good track. That's a good track. Danny Mac, the U.S. Climate Service does not expect a convective atmosphere through Texas until next March. Well, what that means is we're probably going to have a moderate to cold winter with not much precipitation is what that means to me. So it's 7:12. Bring me some more questions. Let me think about some other topics right quick. I may tell a Ray Scott story. Here's one of my favorite Ray Scott stories. We got to go, let's see, I guess it was one of the first Pond Boss conferences, right around maybe 2007 or 8. A guy from Georgia came over, and he was insistent to have Ray and I come take a look at his lake in South Georgia. So we headed over there, and it's a really, really interesting experience. I told this story the other day, but it's worth telling again. And so we went for lunch. We went to this little smorgasbord type all-you-can-eat cafe, and we did what we did, ate there, and as we left, our hosts right next door there was a beauty parlor. And I think I might have told this 2 shows ago last week. I don't know, but it's still worth it. So we walk around the corner, and this guy says, "Hey, Ray, come over here. I want you to meet some people." So we open the door to the beauty shop, go in. There's some really beautiful women in there. Did I tell that last week? Well, it's still worth it. So Ray, he sizes up the crowd, and he looks at me and says, "Hey, you got a quarter?" So I reached in my pocket, and I gave him a 25-cent piece. And so he goes in there, he takes his hat off, and our host starts introducing him around to these folks. And there were I don't know, 6 or 7 women, I think, and 2 of them had their husbands with them. So Ray sizes it up, and you could tell that the 2 guys were starstruck because they knew he was famous. He's an iconic American, started Bassmasters and all that. So Ray walks up to the wife, the husband's standing there, and he walks up and he holds up that quarter and he says, "Honey, I bet you I can kiss you so softly on your cheek that you won't feel a thing." And she blushes. She looks at her husband, and he kind of nods his head, and she looks back. She says, "Now what?" He said, honey, I bet you I can kiss you so softly on your cheek that you won't feel a thing. She says, okay. So she turns her cheek. He reaches over on her cheek, puts a big old wet Ray Scott kiss on the side of her face. Then he said, did you feel it? She says, well, yeah. He said, here's your quarter. And it was my quarter. Well, we're going to miss Ray, going to miss his stories, and just love that guy. I got to go with him on a number of fishing trips. Went to Canada a couple of times. One trip we went to Canada. So did Charlie Campbell, Bill Dance, Johnny Morris, Rodney Honeycutt. I don't remember if Blake Honeycutt was there. What?
Ronnie's dad.
Yeah. And then there were some really, really well-known, famous anglers on this trip, and I was starstruck. Well, I got invited into their cabin, which I think had like 5 bedrooms, 6 bedrooms, something like that, after we all ate. So I went and sat down at the table, and Bill Dance was laying on a couch, and he's telling stories. And I mean, those guys have got some stories. Then Johnny Morris, the guy that's started, founder, and owner of Bass Pro Shops in Cabela's now, he was telling a story about one of the early fishing tournaments before PFDs, life jackets, were mandated. And a squall came up, and he and his fishing partner decided to keep fishing, and they shouldn't have. Well, the wind swept up, their boat got swamped, their boat sank. And I mean, it was a gut-wrenching story because Johnny was talking about he and his partner in this fairly cold lake. When the boat sunk in a minute, while they're treading water several hundred yards away from the dam in deep water, the gas tank popped up. It had popped loose and it popped up. They grabbed the gas tank and they were hanging on for dear life. Well, and Johnny actually, he kind of insinuated this story yesterday. He didn't tell the story, but he talked about how Ray made fun of him after this a little bit later. But yeah, so what happened was Johnny pulled a dime out of his pocket and started trying to scratch through the paint to leave a note for his wife as to what happened to him. You know, so I don't know what goes through a guy's mind when, you know, you're hanging on and you're getting cold and hypothermia setting in. And then one of the fellow anglers on the lake was coming away from the storm, and they looked and saw this little something red bobbing in the water and went to check on it and found Johnny and his fishing buddy, and they pulled him in, saved their lives, basically, saved their lives. And I believe that angler that saved their lives is named Westmoreland, I believe it was. Well, you know, getting to listen to those stories in Canada in the Boundary Waters was just amazing. And I looked at Rodney Honeycutt from Hickory, North Carolina. I said, Rodney, you know what? Somebody needs to write all these stories down because these guys are going to be gone someday, and these stories need to be preserved. Well, at Ray's service yesterday, Rodney sat right behind us, and I got to shake his hand and say hello, and he said, hey, you know, I've just written a 300-page book with 600 pictures in it, and part of the reason I did that, he said, you probably don't remember this, but when we were in Canada, you were so awestruck, and I'd been living these stories for years and years and years because he started fishing with his dad with BASS when he was 15 years old in the 70s. You know, and so Rodney says, when you said that somebody ought to write these stories down, he says, I couldn't get that out of my mind. He said, I got to talking to other people. And he said, my wife convinced me I needed to write a book. So he's written a book, and it's going to be out. And if you're interested in that, can't remember the name of it because I just heard about it. I might have that in my pocket. Actually, you know what? I do. Yep, he gave me his card. It's going to be called Long Guns and Great Fishing Runs. There it is right there. Rodney gave me that card yesterday, and he's going to send me a copy of it to take a look at before it goes to print, and I can't wait. I don't know that I can read 300 pages in a short period of time, but can't wait to get it. So there's going to be a bunch of those stories that I got to hear firsthand, preserved by him. Let's go see what we got coming up here. Let me look here. Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm missing some stuff. Bear with me a minute. Okay, woo-wee. Okay, so Todd says, what size Texas Hunter feeder would you use on 8 acres, and would you feed over shallow water or deep water? Todd, I would get the LM 175, which holds 100 pounds. Now you got to have a dealer like me to send that to ship that to you. If you want one of those, send me an email. I'll order it for you and get them to send it. LM means lake managers. So you can get a regular feeder that holds 70 pounds, but that LM feeder holds 100 pounds for the same price as the 70-pound feeder. And then would I feed over shallow water or deep water? It depends on the time of the year. I think this time of year, I'd probably feed it over. I wouldn't feed over deep water, but I wouldn't feed it over really shallow water. I'd feed it over water 4, 5, 6 feet deep. So there we go, Michael Eric. There you go. There's a testimony for Texas Hunter feeders. Todd, and for feeding bluegills, use MVP, correct? Yes. Yes. Aiming for bass, yes, that's right. Use MVP. Purina Mills Aquamax MVP. That's 9 particle sizes. It will feed bluegill anywhere from 2 inches up to 6 or 7 inches long. Let's see, Leah, I have 2 of the 70-pound Texas Hunter feeders on my 8-acre pond. They blow feed out 30 feet, so they cover a large. That's true. That's absolutely right. Billy Bates, when will we see the first 5-pound bluegill? I have no idea. Or has it already happened to by an unsuspecting pond master? I have not seen a 5-pound bluegill yet. And I'm in year number 42, boys and girls. 42, I haven't seen a 5-pound bluegill yet. I've seen some pictures of 5-pound red ear, but there's a reason for that over in Arizona. I see Sarah is really bringing it to, yeah, she really is. Haven't seen it on ESPN yet, but I heard that's really good. Wesley Ellis, I built my pond based on Ray's videos on how to build one. Yes, Ray put together a series of videos called Great Small Waters, and we're fortunate in that we bought all that he has left, and they're being shipped to our office. So his office is trying to sell out of the inventory and, shut Ray Scott Outdoors down and go to the next chapters in their lives. And Vicki Bender and Leanne Skipworth, my office manager, executive assistant, called and talked to Vicki. They talked, and we're going to buy. They're shipping the rest of what's left of those Great Small Water videos. And I don't care if we sell them or not. I just want them for posterity, but we'd be willing to share them with people. Harrison Davis, if a 10-inch largemouth bass only weighs 6 ounces, therefore has a relative weight of about 80%, only eats enough to maintain its body weight, can it still grow in length? Yes, it can. Yes, it can, but that 10-inch largemouth bass has probably lost a year and a half of its growth potential on the far end of its life. So if it's a male, doesn't matter. If it's a female and it's got Florida genetics in it, it might top out at 9 to 10 pounds. Mike Cook, since we reintroduced fish to our pond this year, I've been feeding Purina starter feed. Let me see here. At what point do we move to a different pellet size feed? If you can see that those fish are consuming it quickly, and you've got fish that have a bigger mouth, then start to switch. And you can actually mix some MVP with small feed as well, if you want to. Okay, so RE says, so I'm catching mostly 15, 16-inch bass. Once in a while we get a 5-pounder. I've been culling the 15 to 16-inch ones. Do I need to stop and cull smaller? Didn't know how to get the different sizes. Yeah, I'd cull some smaller ones. Just be sure their relative weights are low. If you catch a 14-inch bass and looks like what Ray Scott used to say, looked like an Alabama deputy sheriff, throw it back. But if you catch one that's skinny, take it out. So let's see here. Philip Benefield, should I cut back on feed if my 1.5 acre pond is down 4 or 5 feet with no rain expected? And what would cause significant color change from clearish green to cloudy green brown? No rain inflow during this change. That's turning over. That your pond is turning over when it shifts that color. And you should, with a 1.5 acre pond, you're down 4 or 5 feet, no rain expected. I think it'd be okay to feed until your water temperature drops to 55 degrees, then cut way, way, way back. But if the fish are eating really, really well, feed them. Now, if they're not, cut back. Todd Stegner, how do you tell a male from a female? You spread their fins and look. Now, this time of year, it's kind of hard to tell the difference between a male and a female. But a male has a little papilla. And here's the way the fish hatchery guys used to do it. They don't do it quite like this now. They use a pipette in the spring. If they stick a pipette in the vent and get eggs, it's a girl. If they stick it in and get milked, it's a boy. But the way to do it, if you want to try to do it now and guess, you can take a broom straw off of a sweeping broom and run it across the vent, and if the straw hangs up, it's probably a male. You know, that's a crude, long time ago fish hatchery technique, but it still works to this day. All right, so there you go. You know, so hey, I'm dead serious about it. I need 4 more guys. Got room for 4 more people to come to the Institute of Higher Pondology. So send me an email. Just send it to info@pondboss.com. And if anybody wants one of those relative weight charts, send me an email and tell me about it, and I'll send you that. If you want a sample copy of the magazine, send us an email to info@pondboss.com and say, hey, I'd like to have a sample of the magazine. We'll send you one so you can see what it's all about. You know, so I'm going to start wrapping it up, take Debbie to dinner. We're going to see if we can find a nice little restaurant here somewhere in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and hang out there for a little bit, eat something healthy. She looked at me funny, but I know she'll eat healthy. So, hey, listen, I really appreciate everybody hanging out, and you guys know the drill. Hashtag PondBoss Magazine. Share this to your timeline, and we'll have a drawing next week. I'll see to it that we can get that done. So, I do appreciate everybody watching these videos. It kind of keeps me fired up and keeps my brain active, and I love to help you guys. So remember your resources, pondboss.com, Ask the Boss, Facebook. We got all these Facebook Live videos archived. You can go to pondboss.com and find the one that you want and click on it and take a look at that. We got a handful of podcasts. I'm getting ready to do some more podcasts. A lot of free articles. But that $35 a month, a year, is what fuels the economy. So if you guys haven't subscribed, I'm going to ask you to. And almost hit the end way too quick. So I'm going to wrap up, call it a day, and go see if we can find a little bit of food. So until next Wednesday, which I think I'll be home. I never know. I'm pretty spontaneous about this stuff. So until next week, thanks again for watching this video. Adios.